Greetings. Welcome to ITR Live. I'm your host, Chris Hagenow. We are back here in Studio 130 for another fun-filled, action-packed episode of Iowa's favorite conservative podcast. We now have back in studio everyone's favorite John Hendrickson, back from his pilgrimage to West Branch, Iowa. And you spent some time there this week, John.
I did, yeah. I spent 3 days.
Yeah. But was it just touring the grounds and paying respects? Or
I did that. I toured the grounds and
let's back up.
Yeah.
Maybe not everyone. Maybe you're new to the show. What draws you to West Branch, Iowa?
It's the Herbert Hoover Presidential Library and Museum.
Yeah. And you are not just mildly interested in Hoover, but that's kind of your thing.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah. I've been studying Herbert Hoover since I was a freshman in college, so it's been one of my main interests.
Yeah. So you go over there anyway.
Yes.
So what was your goal? What were you trying to get done?
Well, thankfully, Chris had allowed me to go there for a research visit. So I spent 3 days in the archives, which is one of my favorite things to do. And so I looked up one thing, in the coming months there'll be some articles coming out. Yeah. But one issue I looked at was some of the documents containing to early 20th century Iowa tax history. Yeah. And specifically, some people might be questioning, well, why is that important? But this legislative session, we're going to be doing a lot on income tax. And it was in the early 30s that we got our first income tax. And so I was looking at some of the tax groups that were working on that issue. And basically, because at that time, the primary tax in Iowa was a property tax. And there was groups that were saying that in order to have property tax relief, we needed to look for other sources of income, mainly sales and income taxes and other forms of taxes. And so looking through some of those documents. And then the other thing I was looking at was part of a larger project, which I'll have some articles on, is Herbert Hoover's post-presidency, specifically dealing with the New Deal. And that there's a lot of fascinating history to that, and it's sort of a forgotten part of American conservatism. Yeah. And I would say Hoover is really the godfather of modern American conservatism.
Yeah, it's interesting, and obviously we have quite a bit of time in pre-production to talk about all this. Yes. But it's interesting. We talked about this in an earlier episode, but we had a chance to go over there as a whole team this summer and briefly look at the collection they have there at the library and go back into the archives, and the librarians there, is that, I don't know if that's the right, what's the term there for the historical
archivists.
Archivists. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah. But had pulled out some of the stuff for us to see, and even in that little bit, and just a little bit I've gotten to see from your trip there, is how the themes have remained the same.
Yes.
And that frustration with property taxes is been a long-standing issue in Iowa and frankly across the country, and the drivers of it and how people are fighting back. And it's just, I know you understand this as a historian, John, but these the themes repeat themselves for a reason, and we can learn a lot from them, and they can be very instructive on a path forward. And so we're going to keep looking at that.
Absolutely.
And go ahead.
Yeah, I came across a series of articles that were written by a tax policy group that was dealing specifically with Pennsylvania. So it wasn't Iowa, but they had ran a series of 6 articles on property tax. And these were in the early 1930s, and a lot of their arguments that they were putting forward about property tax reform are very similar to the arguments that ITR is putting forward today. And so, and we can go back to other issues. For example, the Electoral College, because that's still an issue of debate, and the arguments for the Electoral College have not changed. And I think that's the same for tax policy, and the reasons for lower taxes. The ideas behind that doesn't really change so much. It's just trying to communicate those ideas and explain those ideas to different audiences.
No, I think that's outstanding. Well, that's good. And I promised you that we would be able to do a lot more on the show as you're writing articles and maybe even like showcase some of the things you found.
I think that'll be exciting.
Political cartoons are fun.
Yes.
Some of the pictures, whatever it is, it's really good stuff. So you made a lot of copies and brought it home with you.
Yeah, and Hoover had a lot of things to say about the New Deal and just about American politics and the Republican Party, and I think there's a lot of wisdom within what he has to offer, even for us today. So I look forward to continuing that.
Yeah, no, it's good stuff. Well, very good. So I wanted to spend some time, John, and I know you had a chance to read this. It's an article here that was in USA Today, but it was mentioning some polling results that they had done nationally. And I know we sometimes fall into the trap here of spending a little too much time on poll numbers and everything. But I think underlying this is what I believe might be the big theme in American politics going into the next election. So the headline to the article here says, inflation is weighing down Americans. Many trust Trump more than Biden to fix it. Now, I don't know that was necessarily the original headline to the article, because the original headline, because this was sent to me, it had a different headline. The original headline was, Biden is selling an improving economy. Americans don't buy it. Maybe that was just a little too critical of President Biden for our media, so they had to soften it up a little bit. But the underlying theme, which we have spent some time on, and is that the economy is tough out there, and it's tough for a lot of Americans, specifically inflation, and they are struggling with it. And despite the Biden administration's efforts to sugarcoat it for Americans, is that they're getting frustrated.
Yes, absolutely.
At this, and so you read it. I mean, give me your thoughts on this. I guess what I'll do, I'll frame this up with one comment that I found on here, is that this was from Javier Torres of South Florida. Maybe it's not all his fault, talking about Biden, or is it? I don't know, but something's got to give. So I think Americans, while they have lost faith in President Biden and the solutions, they're not economists out there. They don't pay attention to this stuff like we do. They just know that they're struggling.
Yes.
So get your perspective.
That's a great take, because the American people, and there's a growing frustration with what Bideonomics is. And I was listening to one of the, I think it was on Fox News the other day, and there was one of the left-wing talking heads defending Biden, almost basically implied that, inflation is going down and the American people just don't realize it. And I think what you said is spot on, because people may not be thinking like an economist, but they do understand inflation because they see it every day.
Yeah.
Gasoline is now over $4 and rising. They're still seeing inflation at the grocery store. And what we saw from census data actually is that inflation has now outpaced earnings growth, or so incomes. And so people are actually losing money, and inflation eats away at wages, and that's why it's so dangerous. And the other thing is that because of Biden, median household income has fallen, and so you see a lot of things, and people are seeing this not only in their paychecks, but in like I said, when they're buying groceries, when they're buying their gasoline and everything else, and so energy continues to increase, and so the people are looking at this and saying, okay, the president's talking about the Inflation Reduction Act and all this spending that's done, but it's not translating into economic policies that are benefiting Americans. And the other scary thing is we set a record now with over $1 trillion in credit card debt.
Yeah.
And that's just another sign where more Americans are relying on credit cards, which is not good.
Yeah, and I would really like to spend some time on that credit card debt question, because it's not that it's just crept up over time when we've got the number. It has skyrocketed. The trend line on that is just stunning, of the amount of consumer debt that's being racked up by the American people. And that you can draw a straight line from that to what we're talking about with inflation here.
Both the president and vice president were bragging how they've reduced poverty, and numbers I saw that reported earlier this week that poverty has increased, child poverty has increased, and so Americans aren't being fooled by Bideonomics. And I think the polls are starting to reflect that. And if I could just mention one more thing, because you referenced Trump economics and that headline where more people trust, regardless of what you think of Trump, during his time in office, the economy was doing very well. And I was talking with one individual the other week about and basically this person is a blue collar worker, and said that under Trump he never made so much more money in his entire working career. He said, I never had so much work, and we had a lot of prosperity, and so people vote with their pocketbook.
Just the top line number on this, overall polling, American people trust Trump over Biden on the economy by a 47 to 36 margin. That's plus 11. Among independent voters, that spread grows to 46 to 26. And that's really where the election, obviously turnout among each candidate's base, but those independent voters. Another interesting number on here is 70% of Americans said the economy is getting worse, and 49% blamed food and grocery prices as the main driver. They undoubtedly have gone up dramatically. What's interesting, I guess, so you shifting into politics, now everyone's trying to frame up their message, play the blame game or whatever it is. But this term of Bidenomics, this is the White House's messaging. This is not a pejorative cooked up by opponents of the administration. I mean, they are taking the state of the economy, putting a name on it, Bidenomics, and trying to sell it to the American people. Here's a quote from the article, John. The White House has tried to get credit for an unemployment rate that's near a 50-year low, a robust job market, including 13.5 million jobs added under the Biden presidency. Yeah, that you can fudge those numbers too, because who's left the workforce, and 13.5 million jobs as people came back online from pandemic shutdowns. But okay. But we go on. And an annual inflation that, according to the Consumer Price Index, is down to 3.7% from a 40-year high of 9.1 in June 2022. Well, two things on that, John. First of all, inflation just ticked back up again. And I don't know that we should be celebrating near 4% inflation. That's pretty bad on its own right.
It is, yeah.
And it wasn't that high when Joe Biden took office.
No.
So, the 9.1 was just crushing. And now at 3.7 or climbing back up, it still really isn't very good. And it still hurts. And it's still hurting the American people. And let's not forget that just because when we see this decrease in the inflation rate, it still means prices are going up. It doesn't mean prices are coming down. It just means that they're growing a little bit more slowly.
That's right, yeah.
So that food and grocery prices that you're struggling with, they're still going up.
Yeah.
Biden hadn't fixed any of that.
No.
And so I'm sure that the Biden administration has a story to tell of why inflation isn't their fault, but I think it strains credibility.
It does, yeah. And people know, because they're seeing it, in the checkout lines and also at the gas pump, and his war on basically closing down American energy has been disastrous. And the other thing too that's alarming for me is that the headline that kind of just did not get much attention is that the deficit for fiscal year 23 is going to be $2 trillion. And I was just looking at the national debt, because there's debate about whether the government will be shut down because they can't get another budget agreement by the end of this month. But So when President Obama took office, the national debt was $16 trillion. Today, it's over $32 trillion.
Yeah,
that's massive.
Yeah,
and I know it's almost that when we talk about that number, it's hard to put that in perspective because we hear about it and it's almost like crying wolf because people don't think. But I think there's going to be serious consequences if we don't control spending.
Yeah,
and that's the other thing is that both parties bear responsibility for this. But what we've seen under this administration is that they've just basically turned on the spending spigot and basically thought they could spend their way to recovery, and it's not working. It's done.
Yeah.
It's done the opposite, and that's why we have these economic problems.
Yeah, it's very simply put, John. That would you say 30? How much trillions the federal debt now?
32, a little over $32 trillion.
Explosion in the federal debt is what is driving inflation.
Yes.
So not only have we created this enormous problem that's weighing us down, we really didn't get a lot for it.
No.
Well, we got pumped some money into the economy during the COVID shutdown, but a lot of that money wasn't even necessary. Some of it's still parked on the sidelines.
Yes.
We got a bunch of wasteful spending on Green New Deal, all this other just nonsense. And so we've just exploded the federal. It's not like we were, trying to win a Cold War or something.
Mm-hmm.
We got nothing.
Yeah.
And it's really discouraging.
Yeah. And then they finally came out that we have given, and this is just a drop in the bucket, but it's an enormous sum over, it was $101 billion with a B to Ukraine.
Yeah.
As just as an example.
Well, that's the question. How much of that $2 trillion deficit is shipped over to Ukraine?
Yeah.
I saw a neat one that apparently, they're starting, other European ports are lined up now with brand new Ukrainian luxury yachts.
Mm-hmm.
Because nobody's asking any questions. There's no accountability for where any of this money is coming from.
No.
You just apparently are if you raise any questions, you're pro-war and you don't care.
That's right. And what would have happened if, and I don't want to make this too political or offend anybody, but what would have happened if we would have spent even $50 billion on securing our southern border? Or
first of all, we try really hard not to offend anyone on this show, John.
Yeah.
But secondly, it is absurd.
Yeah.
It's the things we will do, the price we will pay to defend someone else's border while completely ignoring our own is, well, there's words that would offend, and I will keep them to myself. Okay. Well, that having been said, I guess because I think about these things as political questions, I saw an ad on, I've seen it several times now because it makes me so mad, but it's an ad criticizing 3rd District Congressman Zach Nunn. And it's a woman who's complaining about inflation.
I saw this last night on Channel 8.
Yeah, well, I knew you probably would because that's where I've seen it too, John. But really criticizing Zach Nunn for rising grocery prices. And I just, is anybody buying that? And it's something about corporate profits. I mean, the only justification they give are these really tired, old, Democrat hits. And it just, none of it adds up. Is anybody buying that?
I don't think so. I don't see that because they, from one thing, I don't think you can tie Congressman Nunn to Bideonomics.
Well, and first of all, he's been in office for how long now? How long's he had to move the needle on the economy?
Yeah. I mean, he's just been.
Right. So, I guess the question is, and I understand. I think is that Democrats and Republicans are both looking forward to the 2024 election. And there's going to be so much money spent into messaging, so they got to deploy some of it early.
Yeah.
I think they're test driving some messages.
Yes.
And they know the fact that they are in here on this issue it's almost like the testing ground for this.
Yeah. Well,
they know they've got real liabilities on the economy, and they know that inflation specifically, we see it in this poll.
Mm-hmm.
and specifically food and grocery prices is going to be a political issue next fall.
Yeah.
And they need to find out, can they do anything to move their numbers on it?
Yeah.
So here's the ad. Let's run it for a while and see if Zach Nunn's negatives go up.
Yeah.
Well, you spend enough money on it, might a little bit, but I just don't think people are going to buy it.
I don't either. And I don't know if you saw the article. I think it was yesterday in the, I believe it was in the Des Moines Register about some kind of I don't know if it was a Iowa Democratic Party event or a progressive meeting, and they had it at this liberal T-shirt place downtown.
Oh, I saw a little bit about this.
And
it's a ray gun.
It was about the 3rd District,
right.
and basically they were, and I think they had a comment from someone from the Cook Political Report saying that, they're rating Iowa's 3rd District as leaning Republican, but they're saying this is one seat potentially where Democrats could have a challenge, but they said it's getting late because there's no names that have been brought forward for a potential challenger to none. So I think that's very problematic from the Democrats, and they just don't have a bench. I mean, it shows how weak the party has become.
That's right. I think, and the Cook Political Report, which fine, they reasonable enough job, lean Democrat, but whatever. On the numbers, it's probably kind of a toss-up, but because Zach Nunn will be the incumbent, but they really have had trouble recruiting for that. I mean, there is, you see in I think it's the 1st District now, Marinette Miller-Meeks is going to have a rematch against Christina Bohannon.
Yeah.
I don't know that they've got anyone against Congresswoman Hinson yet. There are, I think, 2 candidates declared against Congressman Feenstra. But, the article, and I've heard this from some of my, acquaintances around town. Cindy Axney took a job in Washington, D.C. or something. So she's out. They recruited, I believe, made approaches to Senator Sarah Trone Garrett, approaches to House Minority Leader Jennifer Confrist, and apparently none of them are interested in running.
Yeah.
And so the one that I had heard before the article came out that is mentioned in the article that I get the sense there is some truth to is Teresa Greenfield, who ran against, that was...
The Joni.
Yeah, it was Joni in 2020 and had tried to run for Congress before that. But when you have trouble recruiting in a swing seat, that's a real sign of electoral problems.
Yeah.
And I think it comes back to what feels like is starting to creep in. And it comes back around to this article and this polling. The issue, barring something really dramatic changing, the issue in this next election is going to be the economy.
Yes.
And it appears that the American people are really starting to clearly blame Bidenomics.
Yeah.
Joe Biden and all the spending and everything they've done. At a minimum, they haven't done anything to fix it.
No.
So here you are.
Yeah.
And I guess maybe a way to round this out a little bit, you're the student of history here, specifically presidential politics. And, it's most of us simple folks, lean back to the James Carville saying, is the economy stupid, which he used to preach to Bill Clinton. Is it the economy? And will it be based on history? And if it is, what does that portend for the 2024 election?
I mean, it's not always the case, but I think most of the time that rule applies.
Right.
And I think because people are seeing it so much in the grocery store lines and the gas pump and I think, just talking to regular Iowans, who I don't know if they're Republican or Democrat, they're all stating, that, I got 2 bags of groceries at Hy-Vee and it was close to $100.
Yeah.
Or I just filled up my tank and it was $50. Yeah. And so I think that's true. And we can look at a number of elections where that was the case as well. And, for example, we opened the program talking about Herbert Hoover, and we can have a conversation about, was Hoover responsible for the Depression? I would say no, but that was certainly a factor when he lost to FDR, but in a landslide, and same with Reagan and Carter. But
I think there might be a really good historical analogy there, that Herbert Hoover didn't cause the Great Depression or the. I mean, we can have some historical debate about it, but it doesn't matter what historians think of that. The American people in 1932 thought it was Herbert Hoover's fault.
That's right. Yeah.
So the rest of it is just an academic exercise, right?
Absolutely.
And in 1980, now I think you probably could say that Jimmy Carter caused the recession at that time, but it didn't matter. No. The American people blamed Jimmy Carter.
That's right.
And they were ready for something different. Now, so let's fast forward to 2024. Times are tough.
Yeah.
The American people seem to be blaming Joe Biden.
Well, I'll use my own brother as an example because he came down to visit over Labor Day weekend, and my brother works for an engineering firm, and basically, he's not very political. I'd say he's apolitical, but he basically said, I never prospered more when Trump was in office, and he said that's why I'm supporting Trump now, because I saw more, my paycheck did better, my 401k did better, I had more overtime, I had more work, and he went on, and he said he said it's terrible. Yeah. He said I have no overtime, and we're struggling and making less money under Biden. And so people relate that. Yep.
And it's the classic old line, are you better off than you were 4 years ago?
Yes, absolutely.
And I think there are some Americans that can answer that they are. And even this polling reveals it's higher income earners.
Yes.
But for most Americans, they're not better off than they were 4 years ago. They're not getting a 9% pay raise year over year.
No.
Or the enormous increase in food and grocery prices, which disproportionately hits people at the lower income levels.
Yeah.
And so it's I think it's going to be, whether it's President Trump or one of his primary opponents, I don't think it's a very difficult political message to say things were better before Joe Biden.
And I think people are starting to wake up to even some of these local governments, whether it's schools in Iowa or counties or cities that are complaining that I heard one argument the other day criticizing Governor Reynolds because, education spending hasn't kept up with inflation. Well, what about the taxpayer? I mean, and like you said, people's paychecks haven't increased 9% the same way. And so these governments expect and demand more money because of inflation, and the taxpayers that are funding those governments, they're taking the brunt of it.
Yeah.
And that's why these governments need to learn to live within their means, just like everyday Iowans do.
The fundamental question that a government official at any level, be it from president all the way down to your local city council member, that an individual's family budget, their own personal budget, matters more to them than the government's budget.
Yes.
And if that disconnect gets too big, it's not going to go very well for those folks that are asking for a vote again the next time. And so whether it's at the federal level with Joe Biden and Democrats in Congress, just the rampant spending and debt, and to be fair, the growth in the federal debt is a bipartisan endeavor. So plenty of blame to go around there, but the American people will be heard on this.
Yes.
When the federal budget becomes more important and the growth in that becomes more important than their own family budget. And we're seeing it at the local level in Iowa.
Yeah.
I think the state government, as we said over and over, has done a tremendous job of limiting the growth of that and having it benefit the taxpayer in the end.
Yeah.
But local governments in Iowa folks are getting angry, and they've been angry 100 years, John, as you saw at the library. Yeah. But they're getting angry when they hear mayors and councilmen and boards of supervisors and administrators telling them and singing the sob story that the 5, 7, 10% increase in spending isn't enough because the legislature tried to honor the local taxpayer. Well, guess what? Folks are tapped out.
Yeah.
They're spending all of this because of Biden's economy on groceries and gas and whatever. And the these folks at local government level have the audacity to whine that they can't make it work when they're still handing out giant checks to local developers for whatever project they don't need. And they're still spending gobs of money on economic development, or they got to spend whatever new building project or whatever bond referendum is coming around the corner. Some of them might be legitimate, fine. But folks out there are getting mad, and these local government folks should be on alert.
That's right. That's well said.
Took us 30 minutes to get there, but we got there. All right.
But one thing, for a future show, we should have a conversation about what some of the Republicans running for president have positioned on economic issues in response to Bidenomics. I think that would be interesting to look at. And to what they're saying. And
it's a project that we've wanted to look at, and we're going to start looking at more as the campaign heats up. But what are these different candidates, and frankly, on both sides of the aisle, saying? And we know what Joe Biden's saying on the economy, but what's the plan? Mm-hmm. And because it is important, and we're going to look at it.
Yeah, and there's some serious things. One thing we didn't get to is the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, and there's key provisions that are going to expire in recent years, and that there's going to be a massive tax increase on a lot of small businesses and individuals if that happens. That'll kill the
let's
economy.
Not pretend that won't contribute to inflation as well, because these small businesses will either fold, they will suffer.
Yep.
Or they'll just pass it on to the consumer.
Absolutely.
So it's on for them. Anyway, John, we are way over time.
Okay.
So, well, very good. All right, John, we're glad to have you back.
Thank you.
We got all kinds of content coming.
Yeah.
And the folks are asking about it. I got a lot. We had an event this week. Got a lot of good feedback about your contribution specifically from the listeners out there. We had podcast listeners at the event saying, we really like that John guy. So anyway, the fans are growing, and they need you back. So, all right. Well, that's all we got for today. Appreciate you joining us. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Don't forget to tell your friends. Don't forget to leave us a glowing review. And with all of that, we will see you next time on ITR Live.